Okay, so this is the first meeting we've been able to have so far, but
Mm.
hopefully it will be informative. It's not going to take a long time tonight, mainly because Jordan, hey Jordan, is the only
Hello.
person in here. But anytime, I can tell you this for future anyway, anytime we have a live session, if I enter the session and nobody comes for for 15 minutes, I'll leave the session. But as long as somebody shows up, even if it's just one lone student who's a trooper, then I will actually hold the session. So if we have 3 stories to discuss over the 3 sessions, then each session will have one story. If we have a number of different things, some sessions could be longer than others, but never will they be over an hour. Okay. Never,
Oh,
never, never. That's just the way
all
I
right.
keep it. And if I'm going over the hour, like if it's, I don't know, 6:01, somebody needs to tell me it's 6:01 and stop me if I don't notice. But I tend to be pretty good. Anyway, now before we start, can you see the student written answers, Jordan? The
I
student
can.
paper? Okay. This is actually one of the an actual student in not this class but the other class of my English 1102, and these are just standard answers written obviously just in normal font with normal stuff, answering the questions that were for the blind men and the elephant, okay, for that particular story. Each
Yeah.
one of the stories that we cover has a specific set of questions. You
Hmm.
don't have to write a big paper or anything like that. You just need to answer all 4 questions or all 3 questions or whatever is, part of the journal. And the journal questions are often different. It depends on the story, what I'm asking, because all stories are not the same. And I may specifically emphasize what we're talking about, like setting or plot or character or something like that as well. So just make sure that whatever your journal does, you can put it in your own words. If there are some errors as far as grammar or something like that, they will have no effect. As long as I understand what you're trying to say, we're cool. It's not a formal paper. Okay. And
All
the reason
right.
I'm showing you this is these are just very standard answers. This is not like the most brilliant journal that somebody turned in. It's just a really good, solid journal that would earn full credit. Okay. So that's just what I
All
wanted
right.
to clarify first. I'm going to stop sharing this for a second, and I'm going to share something else if I can find it. Let's see. Share that one. If I can get between the 3 of them. May show let's see. Is that a different paper? It should show a different one.
Yeah, it does look different.
Okay, so and it says at the top, AI generated journal.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is also from one of my English 1102 classes this
Oh
semester.
no.
And it is completely AI generated. And you can tell if I start reading it out, you're going to go, oh, well, yeah, yeah. First of all, so, I mean, if I just started to read it, The Blind Man and the Elephant is a famous Indian fable that serves as an analogy for the fleeting nature of perspective and the limits of partial knowledge. All I
Mm.
needed to do is read that first sentence to know this is AI. And the other thing that's an absolute clue, if you read all the way through, it all sounds like that. It uses really big words that students don't use. And in fact, there are a lot of words I know, but I don't use. And then it doesn't really answer the questions. So those 2 things tell me it's AI, but I also have several AI detectors that I use through the school. And this one came back as 88% likely AI. That's
Oh
a really high
wow.
score. So, and it even goes through and it will highlight which sentences it thinks were at least partially written by AI. And pretty much this entire thing was written by AI. So that kind of stuff, though, this IA generated paper, because it's really a paper, um, is guess what how many points it earned? The other one
0.
earned 15. This one earned 0.
Ooh.
And it is not something that someone can make up either. So if someone submits an AI generated text and I call them on it and say this is AI, or And I did already have, I didn't post, I'm not going to show this one, but somebody already copied and pasted a website's discussion of the story and put it into their journal instead of doing it themselves. If plagiarism happens, the same thing's going to happen. It's going to receive a 0, and no, it cannot be made up.
Oof.
If the first couple of journals aren't great and you're not detailed enough, I'll tell you, hey, make sure you're more detailed, and I'll probably still give you full credit. Or I'll say, rewrite, make sure and answer these 2 questions in an email, and I'll let you make up those points because you're learning how to do a journal. But if you
Yeah.
do this, if anybody does this and I catch them,
Oh,
that's bad. So does that make
sorry.
sense? So it's that kind of a thing. That's why I wanted to make sure that I put this in a recording so that everybody can see the difference. I don't need you guys to be brilliant in your journals. In fact, you can say, I don't know the answer to this question. It could be this or it could be that, but honestly, the end of it makes me confused. That's an honest answer.
Yeah.
What's not an honest answer is when you copy it from some website that went through and explained all the things. So I'd rather that you tell me you don't know and ask a bunch of questions on your journal than that you pretend you know everything and just copy it from somewhere else or have the computer generate text. So I'm just covering that really quick. I know I sent out an email about it, but I'm trying to be proactive and show people why this is a problem. And the main thing is I just want you to do your own work. Read the
Yeah.
story. It's not long. The Blind Man and the Elephant was a very, very short story. The longest one we're going to read is The Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka, and it
Yeah.
is covered in an entire week. It might take you an hour to read, but that's for the whole week. So it's okay. You're going to make it. I don't have that kind of extensive reading where there's no way you can get it done. I just want everybody to read it for themselves and really be honest in their approach. That's all. Okay. So let's
Okay.
go ahead. Do you have any questions, Jordan, about that? Because if you do, then let's answer them.
I don't have any questions. I did want to apologize for that, my phone going off.
Oh, no, I
It-
didn't even, I was focused, I guess. So,
Thank you. It was alerting me to the hurricane, and I was like, yes, I'm aware.
yeah, I've been getting so many of those. So, okay, I wish I could, yeah, let's put that down. Thank you. Okay, can you see the blind man and the elephant now?
Yeah.
Okay, because I really tried in the journals, and that's another thing too I want to cover. If you have everybody who's turned in journals for the story of an hour and for the blind man and the elephant and for I guess the one that was earlier this the to shooting an elephant, I think is the one that
Yeah.
was first. All of those haven't necessarily been graded, but once you see a score for any of your journals, I do suggest, and this is to everybody who's watching the video, not just you, Jordan, make sure you look at if you click on the score, like your little blue score of 15 or whatever, even if
Mhm.
it's, especially if it's not 15, but even if it is 15, click on the score because it's going to give you my feedback. I am, I mean, I just do not grade without giving a lot of feedback. So it's going to be extremely rare that I would put a score in and not give you a written amount of feedback too. So always check your scores, just click on them, and then you can see, sometimes I'll answer your questions or I'll explain something from the story that maybe I think you didn't get. Sometimes it's further questions so that you can think about those because they might help you on the test. And so I try to, even if we don't end up discussing something live, like in this class, I try to cover things in the journal to make sure you get to cover all the bases. So make sure you always check your scores. And
All
that goes
right.
for any of the essays, when you turn them in, you will get not only the essay back with a grade, but you always get feedback from me. I'm very careful about that because it means a lot. I know that you're trying to do, to get as good a grade as you can.
Yeah.
And if I don't tell you what you're not doing right, you can't improve. And so I'm always going to give you feedback. So just always make sure and check for that. It's going to help you with future journals for sure. So
Thank you.
we're not really discussing the story of an hour a whole lot, though I do want to mention, I don't know how you felt, Jordan, because I can't remember your particular journal, but we had kind of Oh, Brooke, yay! Hello,
Hello.
Brooke. So we actually had quite a few people who thought that she was a woman who was trying to be independent, and she was so disappointed that she couldn't be independent that she died. And so they felt bad about her as a character. And then we had a whole other group of people who thought that Mrs. Mallard was insane and she was crazy to want her husband dead, or she was callous, or she was just mean, or it was funny because either there were pretty positive views of her or they were pretty negative. But we did have a few people who were kind of mixed up about it, like, why would she not love her husband or not love him very often if he was really kind to her? And
Yeah.
so, what was the nature of this? Why did she not feel free? And so several of the journals really got into a discussion of how much marriage has changed. And the truth is, today, not only do women have far more rights, I mean, they can own property, we can hire lawyers, we can inherit, we can divorce, we can choose to divorce our husbands, or our husbands can choose to divorce us. We can get custody of our children, which at that time there's no, I mean, men almost exclusively were the custodians of their children in the case of a divorce. And divorce was very uncommon. So, and it usually it could only be allowed after egregious conduct by one or both sides. So you had to prove that the other person really did bad things for you to be able to get a divorce. But that's not the case today. I mean, you can just have irreconcilable differences or something. Um,
Yeah.
so it's much easier today for that to happen. And the truth is, when divorce became truly legal across this country, the number one thing that changed statistically is not that suddenly tons of people got divorces, it's that the suicide rate for married women dropped significantly.
Wow.
And so when you think about it from that perspective, it's like, okay, wait a minute, there is something that's changing. That's a shift. It gives women the freedom to get out of something that's harmful. And, even somebody who's kind, loves his wife or loves her husband, can still be a very controlling person, and they can still be pretty toxic. And that
Yeah.
relationship itself can end up being toxic. I've actually known of several marriages where I really liked both people, but the two people simply should not be married to each other. And so that's, it's something to consider as well. But in this time, of course, men had the control. And, they were used to it. That was traditional. And yet, Kate Chopin definitely spoke out against that. She actually lost her husband when she was pretty young. She had children, but she was widowed, and she never remarried. And we think it had a pretty significant effect over much of what she wrote. She finally wrote a short novel called The Awakening, and it was about a woman who was married with children and chose essentially to leave her husband because she simply felt so stifled by the role society gave her and he gave her. And she ended up eventually committing suicide. She actually swam into the ocean and we assume never came back. But it was this idea that that kind of death was better to being trapped. And so I think, once Chopin actually published that, she was vilified, and she never published anything else after that in her lifetime.
Aw.
And some of the stories that are commonly read of hers today were never published. They were not published until many decades after she had died, actually. So, but she definitely was one of those feminist voices speaking up for women. And so a lot of people still read her today for that reason. She's definitely a part of a lot of feminist studies. But honestly, what she wrote about was a very different life than what we currently live. Women don't have the same, we don't have to wear corsets, and we don't wear long dresses. We don't have very strict rules about our behavior that would ruin us if we go against those rules. We can wear pants, just the fact that we can wear pants is just amazing. So
Yeah.
that alone is a great step forward and I love dresses, but I like pants days too. So, um, but that's just one, I guess it's in some ways that story is very brief, and yet it says a lot about the time period and a lot about the author too. So in some ways, you can't say it's autobiographical because she didn't die when she found out her husband was alive. Instead, her husband actually did pass away. But now let's talk about the blind men and the elephant, because I think almost everybody really grasped it as, as the fable that it is. The blind men obviously can't see, and so all they can do is walk up to a very large animal and touch a part of the animal. And so they each touch different parts, and everybody got that pretty right. One touches the tail, one is on, touches the ear, but based on that part of the elephant that they touch, they determine something different about what the elephant actually is. So each of them, because they're blind, sees only a part. Now, we, of course, can see. So, we have the ability that these blind men don't have. And yet, in some ways, it's still a metaphor for us. How are we, even though we can see, like physically see, how are we like the blind men when we look at the universe, at the world, at life, at our existence, at society? How are we like them, even if we're not blind? And either of you can answer this. I'm making sure nobody else is in here. Let me see if I can find you guys. Oh, because I took out the participants. Well, they moved. Oh, yeah, just Brooke and Jordan. So if we're not blind, how are we like the blind men in our own lives?
Well, we may refuse to see things from multiple angles.
Right. Yes. So we have our point of view. What's our point of view based on? Where do we get it from?
Our worldview, I guess.
But where does that? Some of it is taught, like when we were little kids. So some of what our parents think has an effect on how we were raised. Our rearing, the culture that we were reared in, the things that were important to us or important to the family may still linger and be important to us. We may believe as we've been taught to believe. We may politically side with the rest of our family as we've been raised to be. And so, some of that is what we've learned from parents, other adult figures as we've grown up. What else, though, has formed our worldview?
Our experiences?
Yes. So we have a hurricane coming in. And some people have had all the experience in the world with hurricanes, and they have a very, definite set of experiences that have given them, oh, this is what I think of hurricanes. Mine's a little bit skewed because I've had a few, at least kind of distant bouts with hurricanes, but I lived in Oklahoma, which was Tornado Alley, and I lived in Kansas, which is like Tornado Alley #2. So I definitely have, there are safety things that I think are important, and there are a lot of things that I'm more lackadaisical about than other people are because I just was used to that kind of stuff when I was a kid. So my experience is different than other people. And so other people in my office, for instance, might be a lot more freaked out than I am, or they might even be less freaked out than I am. Maybe they actually lived on a coastal area or something, or maybe they did and a horrible thing happened. And so now they're deathly afraid of hurricanes. The truth is, though, is there any right answer? Right way to look at a hurricane? Is my perception better than somebody else's?
Not in that sense, although I wouldn't go running out towards one.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I'm not driving down to Mexico Beach this weekend. That's for sure. Well, even tomorrow. Really, tomorrow is the big thing. But no, yeah. And let's go take a break. And somebody said, let's go. Why don't we fly down to Cuba? And I'm thinking, no, this is right now. That's where the hurricane is. Could we just like not? But sometimes it's, our experience can really inform that. And sometimes our experience, because I've experienced something different, we can be very intolerant of what other people have experienced. It's kind of
Yeah.
like, and sometimes we speak for other groups when we don't have any experience with that. So if, for instance, I don't know if any of you, either of you, have ever known what it really feels like to be poor. I have. And I've been poor, poor. I've been student poor, where my husband and I, well, he was my boyfriend at the time, but we lived off of we bought a jar of salsa and a 10-pound bag of potatoes and a dozen eggs. And we ate off of that for a week because we didn't have any money. And so I know what it's like to not have an apartment even to live in, and to just wonder where I was going to spend, where I was going to live that night, let alone the next week. And my husband he's spent time sleeping in a car before when he was in high school. So we both know that. But there are a lot of people they've never wanted for anything in their lives. And yet, do they have opinions about poor people despite never having
Definitely.
before?
Definitely.
Yes. They still say, well, logically, you're only poor if, or you're only poor when, or, you had something to do with it. But they truthfully don't know, because they don't know what it really feels like to be poor. And so, it's the same with any experience. Have you ever had a man tell you what it must be like to be a woman? Because I have. And I've said, nope, you don't know. You're not a woman. I'll even say something like, well, I wouldn't walk around at night in my neighborhood. And they're like, really? Oh, I would. And I said, well, that's nice. You're a guy. It's different for guys. Okay, we have AM, and I'm not sure who AM is. So if you don't want to turn on I think you're not unmuted. So if you want to, you can either tell me who you are so I can write you down, or you can also type it in the chat if you want to. That's cool. Let me open up the chat. Well, that's not it. More. Okay, and you can always type your name in there if you want. I just want to make sure I give credit where credit is due. So, sometimes we try to speak for people, and we don't live their lives, and we don't know what their culture really is, or we don't know what their hardships really are. And so, but we act like we do. And in some ways too, we're comforted by that. We want to think that everything has a logical reason for being. And yet in reality, it doesn't necessarily. But we're often dismissive of other people with different points of view. And sometimes have you ever been afraid to share your point of view because you were afraid it wasn't going to be accepted?
Yes.
Have
Yeah.
you had people get angry when you did express your point of view?
Yes.
Yes.
Sometimes it's even parents. Parents aren't always the least judgmental. But that kind of goes, again, generational gaps can have that too. So grandparents sometimes are pretty judgmental too. But again, they haven't lived the same life that you're living. And so, and sometimes your kids will have a different point of view and go, I'm speaking because I have two, one's almost a 20-year-old. So, and the other one's older, but she's not really. She thinks she is, but she'll get there eventually. So they're both trying to adult, but that also makes them look at everything that their parents do and go, oh, you guys are so awful. So there's that as well. So are there times when you felt definitely judged by other people,
Yes.
Yes.
criticized? And a lot of it's because, obviously, if you agreed with that person, you wouldn't have the same level of judgment. It's because you do things they don't agree with, or say things or have opinions they don't agree with. And that's where the judgment comes from. We don't like things different. And I think, in more than anything, that's what this is talking about. So these blind men, each one of them is blind. And yet their assumptions when they go and touch the animal are that they can see everything. But even early philosophers, like if you go back to Plato and Aristotle, they would say that none of us can see things clearly, that there is no reality, only perception. That, there is a reality, and yet we can't perceive it because we're all biased and we all perceive things through a certain lens. Does that make sense? It's not like we're
Yeah.
all wrong, but none of us can see the big picture. So how do we see the big picture? How could these blind men have seen the big picture, seen the whole elephant? What could they have done different?
Take the other men's point of view into consideration.
Right. So he says, I mean, each one of these people, instead of saying, you're wrong, everybody's like, oh, well, you're wrong, because what I felt was. And so each believed that they were the only one with any truth. And because they refused to listen to everybody else, they never got the entire multifaceted picture of what the elephant really was. So because they wouldn't listen to each other, they never really got a real view of what the truth was. And that's what it's saying about us too. It's not just that we still do stuff like that, it's that it harms us. It means that my view, if I'm not willing to listen to what you, Brooke, have to say, or what you, Jordan, have to say, and if I'm not willing to consider your viewpoints as well as my own, even if they're very different, then I'm never going to see the whole world as it really is. I'm never going to get to truth. The only way to get to truth, at least according to the story, is if you have the humility and the respect for other people enough that makes it so that you're willing to listen to what they have to say and really take it in. Do you think if we talked more with each other and really were open to each other's ideas, especially those people who are different from us, we'd get more of an understanding than if we just get angry at each other?
Oh, definitely.
Do you think, okay, let's talk about it more specifically. Right now, of course, we've had a political arena that's been really volatile for, oh, a couple of decades, really. I think it's gotten worse, but I don't know. I don't know. I don't remember what it was like when I was, a kid. So, but a lot of the talking points are just kind of shouting matches where neither side really seems to be willing to listen to the other side at all. And even the two sides seem to express really extremist things. And yet most of us, I think, fit more in the moderation. Like we like some ideas of some sides and some ideas of other sides, but we don't really want to go skewed either direction. Like there are people in both groups that kind of seem a little wacky. And I think most of
Yeah.
us feel uncomfortable with that level of extremism. But if they were willing to work together, what would change? Instead of, getting in front of microphones and shouting at the other group, what could they do different? In
I
your
think if
opinion,
they would sit down and have a conversation open mindedly, I think that our whole entire country would be better as a whole.
if they could cooperate
Definitely.
and say, okay, well, you want this and we want this. How can we find a compromise that can get us the best of both? And I think there's far more that we share. We just point out the differences. It's kind of like churches, each denomination, gets mad at the other denominations, but in reality, like 90% of what they believe, all they all share. It's kind of like that. And yet they're nitpicking at the little stuff or certain extreme topics instead of looking at like the big picture. It's kind of like, I mean, even something as volatile as abortion. I don't allow my students to write about abortion because they tend to get really heated. And yet the truth is there's a lot of viability to all of the different facets of it. You don't want mothers to suffer, especially if they've been in, incestuous relationships or rape or something like that, or their health is at risk. But you also don't want the baby to be aborted if possible. You'd like to save lives. And so the problem is we can't just ignore anything to the contrary. We need to really consider what's the most compassionate thing to do that's going to help as many moms and as many babies as possible feel supported. And so, in some ways, we're arguing about the thing as a way of drawing lines, but it's not solving the problem. And the problem is that we have all these moms who are getting pregnant and they don't want to have children and they don't feel supported. So, how do we fix that instead of yelling at each other? And I think that's the case with a lot of, I mean, that's probably one of the more extreme divides. And yet most of us could find reasonable ways to, I mean, we compromise all the time with our friends, with our significant others, with our children and parents. We find ways, especially with family and friends, to really, we want things to work because we want to keep our relationships. And so in some ways, we're all Americans. Could we do that? It's funny that a short story makes us talk about this. And yet that's kind of what this is about. If we're going to really grow as individuals, we have to be willing to listen to each other and find paths through so that we can stay friends. And honestly, I mean, I know a lot of people at the state level anyway, who are politicians, and a lot of them, even if they're from different political parties, get along really well. For some reason, though, at the federal level, this just doesn't happen. And it's gotten more and more like extreme. And I don't think that's a healthy thing. I don't know which one of you said that, it would be so much better if we could get them to, actually like talk to each other, sit down in a room together and listen to each other. But I think, what do you think makes it so that we don't want to listen to other people? Why don't we want to be wrong? Like, why don't we want to, or at least even doubt that we're right?
Pride.
Okay, that's actually a really smart answer. And the opposite of pride, and pride is like the basic, it's supposedly the source of all the deadly sins, according to the Catholic Church. Anyway, so we have pride. What's the opposite of pride?
Humility.
It is, and it's one of the 7 virtues, is humility. And it's probably the base of all the other virtues. So not setting ourselves up as superior to other people, but instead having humility and saying, look, other people may have ideas that are valid, and I need to be able to listen. Why do you think that's so hard in today's society? Why is it hard for people to be humble enough to listen to other people? I mean, kids are really good at being prideful. They don't want to, you say sorry when they do something mean to their brother or sister, and they go really snarly, sorry, and you're going, no, we actually need to do this right. You need to admit that you've done, why do we not want to admit that we've been wrong, or we've said something cruel, or we've done something bad, or we've made a mistake? Think about the story that we just had due yesterday, and we'll cover it more next week when we have the chat sessions. But with shooting an elephant, he could very well have said, oh, well, the elephant could have been dangerous. I mean, he looked calm, but he could have gone on a rampage any second, so I had to shoot him. But he doesn't do that. Instead, he admits that he shot the elephant not because the elephant was really dangerous looking, but because he felt he'd look foolish if he didn't. He felt pressure from the crowd to do it, and he felt that they would judge him and think ill of him if he didn't shoot the elephant. And so when he admits that, that's really, I mean, it's a humbling thing to say, and it's probably a very hard thing for him to deal with. He probably has felt guilt for years because he shot that elephant. Is that an easy thing to deal with? To admit,
No.
hey, I did wrong, and to have to apologize to people, or
No.
write it out? No, it's not it is not easy. It's very hard, especially if we don't do it. Like it's like anything, it gets easier with practice. And so maybe we need to practice listening, practice humility. And it's not easy. Maybe we have to practice apologizing and taking ownership of our mistakes. And if we do that, other people may be more willing to do the same. And maybe we can get somewhere, But this is a very short story, and yet it has a lot to say. And so, yes, it is kind of a, one of those moral tales, but a lot of the old folk tales are. They're trying to say something. And so that's something to, I guess, to look for. And one reason I always put in some type of parable is because those stories they have a theme and they certainly have a point to make. And so it's good just to see it even in a very simplistic way like this. So I guess our goal, so we're going to go home, we're going to be with family while the hurricane's blowing through. And our job is to be humble and listen, especially when people say things we don't agree with. We're going to go, okay, I'll listen and be humble. So I think do you guys have any questions, any comments with this story or any questions about the class? Anything at all?
I do not.
Okay. Yay. If you ever do, I will always make sure I leave time. I'll try to always leave time at the end of every chat session. So if there is, even if it's something about your paper or an assignment coming up or whatever, or something I wrote, you can totally ask me. And you can, on the chat too, you can actually select, instead of everyone, you can select to just select me. And you can send me a private message that way. So just know that
I
that's
have
possible.
a question.
Mm-hmm.
So, is there different parts in the book that we're supposed to be reading right now? I'm trying to get ready to do the journal over the treasure in the forest.
Mm-hmm.
And it talks about, like, one of the questions asks about the main character's dynamics and, like, if they're flat or round and stuff.
Right.
And I was just wondering if there's, like, certain parts of the book that I need to be reading this week to be able to write on those properly,
Well, and
or...
that's a good question because I probably should put it here, but what I will probably end up doing, the textbook is woefully inadequate. And it's an OER textbook. That's why we have it. So thank you for reminding me about that. And as it is, because tomorrow is like the school is closed, you can pretty much assume that I'm not going to, like, that due date for tomorrow night's journal is not in effect. And so let me just go ahead and I'll put in a little blurb and send it out to you guys about the static and dynamic and flat and round characters. And honestly, even if you look up character, if you looked it up online and looked up static and dynamic and flat and round, it would give you very succinct definitions of what that is. And it's also, I think they're also in the literary terms in the textbook. They'll actually cover characters and what those different, the flat and round, but that's just at the end of the textbook. But
Okay.
even if you don't know, you can even say, I don't know what a flat or a round character is. Flat characters are just really stereotypical. They're not real people. Round characters feel real. They feel like actual human beings with, like the guy in the shooting an elephant. He was complex and he had to make really complex choices and he wasn't just a stereotypical something, so the police cop or something. He was a real person. But then static and dynamic, static just means they don't change. And dynamic means they change over time. They learn something, they act differently, they choose differently or something like that. Like if you ever saw Les Miserables, for instance, with Jean Valjean, he is a dynamic character because he changes radically from the beginning of the movie or the play or the book to the end. And it's harder to do dynamic characters in very short pieces like this. So in The Blind Men and the Elephant, the blind men are all static characters. They don't change. And they're all pretty flat too, but it's a parable, so that makes sense. They're just very one-dimensional. But honestly, if you don't understand a terminology, you can always look up what those terms are in the literary terms in the textbook. And if you don't see, sometimes we actually have chapters that talk about those things, like in chapter, I think it's chapter 6, maybe it's chapter 5 for prose. You might look through that chapter that we read at the beginning of the week and just see if those terms are there. And if they're not, just say, well, I couldn't find it in the chapter, and then just take your best guess. Remember, I'm not looking for you to necessarily give me the right answer. I want you to give me your answer. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so there's not any chapters we're supposed to be reading this week. I think it was like last week or the week before maybe, you told us to read chapter 5,
Yes.
but
And
this
so
week
it
it's
covers
just
some stuff. It talks about what plot is, what setting is, and things like
yeah.
that. If it's not covered specifically in that chapter, though, like those terms that I'm asking you about, we're going to cover them in discussion, and you can take a good stab at it and see what you think. And if you don't know what that is, it's okay. But look in the literary
Okay.
terms at the back of the book too, because a lot of those are going to be defined pretty well there.
All right.
Does that help?
Yes, it does.
Thank
And
you for the
we
question.
have it says on our calendar online that September 1st
Mhm.
we have 2 discussions due. I just want to make sure that's right before I start
Okay,
going ahead and working on both of
let me
them.
look. I'm going to go to I can't do that. Let me look at I'll go to the syllabus for a second, because that's not what I remember. I'm just looking at a new copy of it. Scrolling. Because every one of my classes is different. So I want to make sure I answer the correct thing. I only have, yeah, this is August. So chapter 8, that chapter 8 is the one that you need to look at, chapter 8. And then, so Monday was wait. Well, this is all, yeah, I'm in the right, oh, let's see. I'm in the wrong syllabus. Darn it. I'm like, why is this all wrong? Okay, I went to the wrong class. Sorry. That's why I always try to look first. Okay. I'm going to the correct one. It just takes me a while sometimes. I'm an old person. Okay. I was thinking, this is all wrong. This is Irwin, because I have one class that I teach online just for Irwin High School. Okay. Now to actually answer your question. So the only thing that you'll have due in 9-1 is the treasure in the forest. Now, the other thing you have, though, is your essay topic. But it's really not due until Sunday or Monday. I just want you to, and it's in the discussions portion where you actually, and actually I haven't, that reminds me, I need to go put that in there. I just want you to be talking to me about what you think, what story you might consider looking at. I want you to look at the 2 essay assignments, because you can choose either one. One is a comparison between 2 different short stories that we've read. The other one, though, you get to write your own short story and just use one of our short stories as inspiration. And you can do either one of those topics. You just get to pick which one you want to do, based on whether you want to write a short story or you just want to write an essay that compares 2 short stories. But it's what's due at the beginning of next week. So it's really due Monday night, I guess. But honestly, I'm not going to grade it until sometime Tuesday. And I'll probably look at your topics in the discussion post, and I'll just give you questions or give you suggestions or things like that in the forum itself, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. So tomorrow we have Desiree's, making sure I'm on the right thing. Yeah, tomorrow we have Desiree's Baby, and then Friday we have Treasure in the Forest, those 2 stories. And then next Monday, well, next Monday we don't have anything. Next Tuesday we have The Horse Dealer's Daughter, but then I'm not going to really grade. Like, all next week we're going to discuss essay topics. So just see what you can do to think of, is there a short story so far that you found that you really liked, that you would like to use as an inspiration story, or is maybe one of the 2 stories in a comparison? If so, post it, and then I can give you suggestions as to another short story that might work for you. So, but it's not something that has like a definite stop line where you're going to get a 0 if you haven't done anything with it yet. In fact, I have students who come up with later topics, and I still give them full credit for that. Sometimes
Okay, so I have the chance to like write my own story if I want to.
I would go ahead and go to the essay section within your within the unit. Let me go ahead. I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to go share Google Chrome, and we're just going to go in there. If you go to lessons and go into fiction, you see the journals are there, and then there's an exam, which you can't see because it's not there. but then it says Unit 1 fiction essay. There are two different assignments, the creative fiction paper assignment and then a prose comparison. Either one is totally usable. I would go ahead and read through both of them though and decide which one you want to do. And
All
I've
right,
also
I'll
had some
probably do
students
that
do one and
tomorrow.
some students do the other. So it's totally cool. Okay.
Alrighty, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
I know that, we're going to be having some bad storms, and
Right.
I was just wondering how any potential power outages will affect due dates if we miss a due date due to power outage.
Don't worry about it. If there's things like that, I mean, as it is, if we have power, I mean, we're out, the college, the campus is closed, is closed tomorrow for sure. And we're not allowed on campus. They told us specifically today in a meeting that we're not supposed to come to campus and we need to not do that. The way the police chief even said, he goes, well, we're going to see that you entered the building and we're going to see you on camera. So don't come. Because of that, and we're not working from home, my assumption is if you guys lose power, just as soon as you get your internet back up and your power back up, make sure you communicate with me what happened. We tend to be really forgiving about stuff like that. I definitely do. This kind of thing happens, and the last thing I want is for all of you guys to rush home tonight and read Desiree's Baby and A Treasure in the Forest and turn in journals really super fast and rushed because you're scared to death about tomorrow. That's stupid. So don't do that. If
Thank
something
you.
happens to you, hopefully your power, if it goes out, won't be out for long, especially in the heat. Plus your food will all spoil. That's all bad stuff. So, but if something happens, don't worry if you can't get into Blackboard and you can't send me an email. Just as soon as you get set back, where you can communicate with me, let me know. Okay.
All right.
And
Thank you so
we'll work it all
much.
out. I'm not going to be a oh no, there's a hurricane. Sorry. No, I believe in acts of God, and we can totally manage those in this classroom. So, but that's a great question. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you.
And if do you have any other questions? You guys have had great
Mm,
questions.
I think I'm good.
Okay. Well, hopefully we will be safe. Please, don't do anything, risky in this weather. And hopefully we'll see each other next week, first thing. And Monday we will not have our chat because I just totally forgot about it. We have Labor Day. And so I can't hold it. I'm not allowed to hold a chat on a holiday. So we'll do our chats on those two chats on Tuesday. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Have a good weekend. Be safe. Take care of yourselves. Get the work done when you can. Make sure, use the time wisely, obviously, but hopefully we'll all come back just fine next week. Okay?
Okay.
Okay.
Hey, take care. Thank you so much for your questions. Bye.
Bye.